because I feel like, you have to be a great storyteller to be a great history teller too. You can look up facts, you can look up figures, you can look up dates and stuff, but telling the kind of the story behind the story and making things come alive.
Kelly here, your host of Word First 931, and I am so excited. This is the annual Dogwood Walking Tour with Mr. Jimmy Haley, and this is History with Haley segment. And tell everybody a little bit what we're about to do.
Well, it is a historic cemetery. It's known as Riverside or the New City Cemetery. So it's been here since 1878. Okay. And so if you see bodies here before 1878, they were moved here from other locations. But we'll be looking at the first burial that was here. But it's a beautiful time of the year. There's dogwoods in bloom. And so these dogwoods have been here for almost 100 years. Wow. And some of them are kind of reaching the end of their lifespan. We're replacing them slowly. So if people want to do a donation to the city and plant a dogwood in somebody's memory, we'd be welcome to have them. So as a replacement. So we'll be focusing a little bit on the Civil War and just to reconnect with that earlier segment that we've done together and talk a little bit about the stories and some of the important things that took place here in McMinnville during the Civil War and right afterwards, including the murder of the town marshal.
Oh, wow. Well, here we go. So let's enjoy this nice walking tour.
But Cooksey was one of those frequenters down the houses of ill repute, and he would hang out in the bars with the local boys and drink a beer or two or a shot of whiskey, and he was the town marshal. So he knew dirt on people, they knew dirt on him. And so one night in the dead of winter, he was called to the house of ill repute, right, not very far from where the cemetery is today. And this before the cemetery was even established. And he was there was some kind of commotion down there, and he needed to go check it out. And so he started down the hill with his gun, and it was, of course, pitch black dark. There weren't any street lights at that particular time. And started up the steps of the house of ill repute, where some of his lady friends worked, and he was shot dead on the front steps of the porch and fell dead right there at the front door. And so there was a huge commotion then. Rumors started spreading, and it spread like wildfire. Everybody came down there. It's Cooksey and he's dead. It's Cooksey and he's dead. Who shot Cooksey? Of course, everybody that was in the house, they scattered. The ladies said, we didn't see anything. We don't know who shot him. And so it appeared that there was some kind of cover-up. So maybe one of the town boys he had been drinking with had it out for him and, told him, there was a commotion down in the depot and then waylaid him. We don't really know the entire story. The coroner for McMinnville at that particular time was Fletch Woodard. Now, Fletch Woodard was a Unionist during the Civil War, as a lot of prominent families were. His father was a Methodist minister, and so he had grown up in a religious background and all this, but he also was a photographer. He was a medical doctor and medically trained. He went to med school, so he wasn't one of these self-taught people that just took up medicine. He was actually trained at Cumberland, and so he became a medical doctor. He was, he liked forensics, so he was the coroner. So he had Cooksey's body, of course, laid out, did the autopsy on him, and said, yeah, he was shot. The bullet killed him, and killed him almost instantly. But just almost as soon as Fletch Woodard had done the coronary and the autopsy rather on the body and did his assessment, people started pointing fingers at Fletch Woodard, and he said, "Why are you pointing fingers at me for?" "Well, you were seen out drinking with Cooksey, earlier, and all these people started saying, we heard you threaten him, and yada yada." And so all of a sudden, Fletch Woodard was arrested for the murder of Enoch Cooksey, and so It was kind of ugly, but a lot of people didn't like Fletch Woodard anyway because he was kind of a tattletale and a gossip, even though he took some of the earliest pictures in Warren County and McMinnville, that we still have a few of those, including the panorama that shows the city during the Civil War and then later in 1878. He wasn't very well liked by people. And he oftentimes arrested some of the bad town boys, some of the rich people's kids, sons, were not too constructive, let's just say. They liked to drink and carouse around at nighttime, and they didn't work, and they mooched off their parents, and they thought they were hot stuff, and nobody could touch them. And Enoch arrested them. He took them to jail when they were, drunk and disorderly. He would take them to jail, and so and people called them the Bad Town Boys. I mean, they had a nickname, and they were like a little rough fraternity, so to speak. And so many of the boys or whatever started, telling stories on Fletch Woodard, and all of a sudden Fletch Woodard was embroiled in a huge trial where they were going to convict him of murder, and had all these witnesses that supposedly made up stuff, and he was convicted of murder. And they took him to Nashville because they were afraid that they were going to break in the jail and somebody was going to string him up. So he was in Nashville in jail. During the Civil War, Fletch had fled to Nashville. Nashville was the first big southern city to fall to the Union Army after the fall of Fort Donelson. The Union Army moved in and occupied Nashville. And a lot of Union families from McMinnville and Middle Tennessee, in order for their own safety, they moved to Nashville too, and for protection, because the Union Army was there. They were Unionists. They didn't support the Confederate cause. Business was still being conducted in Nashville. Even if you were a Confederate, and even though the Union Army occupied Nashville, you could get passes. So Confederate families that needed to do business in Nashville could get a pass and go to Nashville and then travel back to McMinnville, even though they were Confederates. Soldiers couldn't, but families could. So the Fletch Woodard went back and forth between Nashville and McMinnville, but when he was in Nashville, he met a lot of society people, because he was a photographer, he was a doctor, and he met a lot of society ladies and their husbands. And so when he was in Nashville, somehow he escaped with some help and fled Tennessee. We're not sure exactly where he went. He's a relative of mine. One story says he went to Texas. One said he went to Canada. I think he went to Canada, but who knows where he actually went, because he never really said where he went. But he sued for a retrial, and so it went to the state Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overturned his conviction. And so he was able to come back to McMinnville, but he came back with a revenge. And so Fletch started writing telltale books and published his own little magazine like the National Enquirer, where he told rumors and tales on as many people as he possibly could to get even with some of the people that testified against him. He had nicknames for people. He named the murder of Enoch Cooksey, which was one of the bad town boys who was from a very prominent family. And of course, nobody was ever tried, nobody was ever convicted of the murder of Enoch Cooksey. So unfortunately, somebody's come down here and pushed his tombstone over, it looks like, but I'm going to try to put it back together and fix it. Now, he was buried in the Old City Cemetery, so he's one of the ones that it was moved down here. This little symbol here, which was part of the cover-up, supposedly, of the murder, was a secret society known as the Order of Oddfellows. And it had started in England, but it was kind of like the Freemasons. And the Freemasons and the Oddfellows oftentimes met together. Many of them had the identical membership, and it was mostly, the Oddfellows was mostly former Confederate soldiers and officers. And so Cooksey was an Oddfellow. Fletch Woodard blamed the Oddfellows for the cover-up and for his conviction, and so they were a bunch of crooks and a bunch of people with vendettas, and he felt like he needed to expose them. So the Oddfellows continued to flourish, however, and like I said, Fletch came back to McMinnville, had a little small shop there where the chamber is. You can see one of the insets explains that Fletch Woodard's studio was there. And when the Warren house was mysteriously burned down, someone conveniently torched his studio as well. Like, oh look, the fire has spread to Fletch Woodard's studio. So sad, so sad. You know, poor Fletch. And he always said that someone carried the flames to his studio and set it on fire and burned him out. So he rebuilt what he called the Citadel, his little oasis, which looked like a shack, and right next to it was one of the most beautiful saloons that was built in McMinnville right next door to it, the Maxwell House. And everybody wanted to get rid of Fletch. And so, you know, they had tried to burn him out, and he just rebuilt using little scrap stuff, and it looked like a shack. And on the side of it, he put Fletch Woodard, the liberal. And he did concoctions, he read forensic stuff, read bumps on your head. He was an interesting, very eccentric fellow. He influenced, Fletch Woodard did, and we'll see his grave as we do. We're going to go over here to Dad Lively's grave. So we're going to walk over there because Dad Lively grew up during the Civil War, and Fletch Woodard inspired him to become a world famous photographer. So we're going to go over to Dad Lively's grave. There used to be 2 huge dogwood trees in this lot, and of course they've died. And you can see a lot of the dogwood trees are dying. They're, like I said, close to 100 years old, and we're trying to replace them. So if you want to do one in memory of somebody, that would be great. The city has a source. They're like 50, 60 bucks a piece, and they'll plant them for you, find a place for them. So Hank Patton does a good job at that. So this is the Lively family. And so they've got this big lot here, and it's all of their family, brothers, cousins, nieces, nephews. But in particular, this is the one I wanted to talk about, was W.S. William Spencer, Dad Lively. He was known as Dad or Daddy. He grew up as a little boy during the Civil War. So he was born in 1855. And so he was about 10 years old when the war was over. But during the war, he saw everything that was going on. And one of the people that fascinated him growing up was Fletch Woodard, the photographer. So he saw Fletch out taking pictures. You know, he thought Fletch was very eccentric. Fletch had invented several things in the camera process in early days of photography, had patents on them. And so, you know, he thought he was a genius. And so Dad followed him around and saw him taking pictures. Now, Dad's family was, you know, prominent here in McMinnville. His grandmother, Eliza Mitchell, was an educator. And so she, you know, helped start some of the earliest schools here in McMinnville. Her husband, Dad's grandfather, was a builder. So many of the big fine houses in McMinnville, Mr. Mitchell, Salmon Mitchell, built those. He's buried in the other cemetery. And along with Dad's mother, because she died when he was little. But Dad grew up watching Fletch Woodard and cameras and was fascinated by it. And instead of going into the furniture business and the undertaking business, which his family did, the Lively brothers had a funeral home that John High bought out when he came to McMinnville in the 1820s. So the Lively's were furniture makers as well. So they made coffins, they made furniture. They had a store downtown, as well as a factory where furniture was manufactured. But Dad became so fascinated with photography that his parents let him become a photographer when it was not a popular thing and a very money-producing type of business. But his family had enough wealth to kind of let him do his thing. So he didn't stay in McMinnville. He went to Alabama and worked as a photographer, and one of those photographers that oftentimes went to people's houses and I'll take your picture for $5, $10, whatever, and 50 cents. And but he came back to McMinnville and had a fairly good business because he was a premier photographer. He didn't really compete with Fletch Woodard. By that time, Fletch Woodard was on everybody's kind of doo-doo list, and nobody hardly went to Fletch Woodard for pictures. So Fletch was making a living selling herbal concoctions and reading bumps on people's heads, phrenology. and into spiritualism and doing seances and all this sort of stuff, as well as being a medical doctor. But Dad became the premier photographer in McMinnville. And when he was growing up, he traveled around to a lot of camera shows, photography exhibits. He exhibited some of the world's fairs as well. He was good friends with Mr. George Eastman from the Kodak Company, and so they were good buddies. And so Mr. Eastman challenged him one time to come up with some pictures for an exhibit. And, you know, Dad said, you know, been there, done that. I've won all these, you know, photography awards. I want to do something different. And of course, Mr. Eastman said, what do you want to do that's different, Dad? And he said, what about if I create the world's largest camera that takes life-size pictures of people? They don't have to be enlarged. They're actually glass plate negatives that are full-size, human body size. And it fascinated Mr. Eastman. He said, we'll get you, you buy all of our chemicals and all of our equipment anyway. So we'll get you whatever you need. So Dad formulated and created and constructed the world's largest camera. And so it took life-size portraits. And so some of his portraits now, they're in the Smithsonian and in the Eastman House in Rochester, New York as well. But Mr. Eastman also said, Dad, you need to be sharing some of your talents with other people. You need to be training somebody to follow in your footsteps. So Dad decided that he was going to buy the old Cumberland Female Academy building at the end of College Street, and up there high on the hill, there behind First Baptist Church, was a big college building, and 2 wings had been added to it, so it was huge, a huge building. And so he decided he was going to start the Southern School of Photography. And so he did, and that was like 120 years ago that he started it. People from all over the world came to McMinnville, Tennessee to learn photography from Mr. Lively. And so people from Australia, people from Canada, people from Mexico, people from Germany, people from Japan came here to learn photography. And it was co-educational. So women as well as men could take photography classes. And so one of the most famous photographers that were trained there came here during the Mexican Revolution. And his family were wealthy and on the wrong side of the revolution. And so he came here and became a master photographer, went back to Mexico and photographed the entire revolution. And now all of his portraits and stuff are there in the National Gallery in Mexico City. And so he accredited all of his talent to Mr. Lively. So in 1928, the building burned. It caught on fire. It was a cold winter night, and a big pot-bellied stove that had been stoked and too much wood, I guess, or coal put in it, exploded and caught the building on fire. The whole town kind of turned out to try to help save as much as they could from the institution. The Livelies also lived there as well in one wing. And so there was no fire equipment. There was nothing to fight and battle the blaze. It was below freezing, so any water that they got froze almost as quickly as they could haul it to the site. And so the building burned. It so devastated Mr. Lively. He decided to give up photography. His son carried on his name, Lee, in Murfreesboro. But Dad decided that he was on a quest. He had been mayor a few times too. And so one of his chief accomplishments was to start a modern fire department in the city of McMinnville. And so a building was built on Court Square, and it's still there. And that 1928 LaSalle fire engine that you sometimes see in parades, and it's down at the fire station now, Mr. Lively made sure that the city had its first fire truck that could battle fires, so there would not be another devastating fire the way it was. It was a volunteer fire department, and so a lot of young people, young men, decided to become volunteers. It's only been in the last few years that we've had a full-time, they weren't volunteers anymore, a full-time fire department. And so that's professionally trained. So Mr. Lively, a lot of you may have pictures in your household somewhere that the Livelies may have taken. They would be 100+ years ago when the Rocky River Coal and Lumber Company came to Champaign, Tennessee to exploit resources out of Van Buren County and got the rail spur all the way up to Rocky River to haul big trees out for lumber, and they looked for coal as well. Campaign became a company town, and so the company hired him, Rocky River Coal and Lumber Company, that was stationed out of New York, hired the Liveleys, Mr. Lively, and his son Lee, to take pictures of Campaign and the factories and the company houses and all that. So those still exist, and so they capture a little moment in time. So Campaign during the Great Depression was still hiring people, one of the biggest employers. And actually a little country town like Campaign, Tennessee had street lights and running water, which was a phenomenal thing for a little small community like that to have. But it was a company town. They had their own company store, their own company script, money. And so when the company went broke, went bankrupt or whatever, you know, most of that disappeared. There's still a few of the company houses and the company store is still there, but the factories are all gone and Campaign's completely changed. But we owe those pictures that we've got of Campaign to Mr. Lively and his son Lee. So, questions?
The Bill Lively that used to have Lively.
That's his son.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, and he's buried right here too, as well.
That's what I was
yeah,
wondering.
he's buried.
I worked for him.
Yeah, and here's Billy's mama, Ethel. So yeah. This is Fletch Woodard's, the photographer, Dr. Woodard's family's lot. And so you can see there's some just river rocks down here marking graves. Fletch was basically bankrupted by the Bad Town Boys in the city of McMinnville, and people boycotted him, called him a weirdo and a freak, and called him names, and so he was you know, buried down here in this lot. He carved his own tombstone, believe it or not. Here it is, what's left of it. He carved his own tombstone. And after he died, the Bad Town Boys came down here and busted it to pieces. So he didn't have a tombstone for a while. It was laid down flat and covered up. I dug it out, but I was determined, with the help of some people, to find out exactly where his grave was. And I started digging and pulled that one out. And since his tombstone was broken, I decided to give him a proper tombstone again. So I bought that and brought it here, and it says J. Fletch Woodard, the Liberal, February 7th, 1831 to January 7th, 1913, McMinnville's first photographer. So that's similar to what's on his rock up here. But Fletch Woodard, like I said, was our first photographer. He was a medical doctor. He was a little strange, and he was even stranger after he was, you know, after he was framed for murdering the town marshal. He swore he never did it. He started publishing, like I said, books and little ragtag magazines and handouts and brochures he would hand out on the street. And the thing about it is, as soon as he would publish something, the Bad Town Boys would buy every copy and burn them. And so even some of his books, and he wrote several books, one about the Bad Town Boys where he exposed the whole shebang about his framing of murder. And so a lot of his photographs have been destroyed by people. They said, that's that old crazy Fletch Woodard made that picture, let's burn it. He just was a pariah. James Dillon, the former county historian, always called Fletch Woodard McMinnville's most hated citizen, the most hated guy in McMinnville. And so I'd heard about him when I was little because he's a distant family member, but the whole saga and the cover-up and the genius that he had to invent patents and patent things for cameras and darkroom development even before the Civil War was amazing. Also that he was a medical doctor. And he was a spiritualist, like I said before. Even though his father was a Methodist minister, he never went to church. He was into spiritualism and holistic medicine and herbal medicine. Instead of using, you know, prescription drugs, he compounded his own medicines there in his little shop. He sold cider that with vinegar in it to help He thought that was a great way to cleanse the body and to, neutralize acids and all this sort of stuff. He was a phenomenal kind of person. But I felt like after, his tombstone was damaged and the Bad Town Boys, and that book, there was a copy that was found in the state archives. And so his Bad Town Boys book was reprinted by Monty Wanamaker. So they're at the little museum next to First National. They may still have a few copies of the Bad Town Boys. I loaned mine out and never got it back. So I'm still looking for a replacement. But the other books he wrote on spiritualism and holistic medicine and on some of the camera work that he had done, they don't exist. They've been destroyed. So if you look up on one in some family treasure trove or trunk or something, anything with Fletch Woodard on there, I'd appreciate you giving me a call. We had no picture of him until one of my family members passed away, and so she had promised me some of her pictures, and I'd gone through some of them before. And so her daughter, Jane Trammell, brought me a box of pictures and said, these were Mama's, she wanted you to have them. And she said, I've gone through them, I don't know who half the people are. And the very top one was a picture of Fletch Woodard outside of his studio right before he died. And so it shows the Maxwell House Saloon in the background. It shows the sign that was painted, the Liberal on the side of his. It shows his, pictures in the window. He's got little, sandwich boards out front advertising his vinegars and his medicines and his reading the bumps on people's head phrenology. All that's there. And I looked at it, and it's the first thing I saw. I said, "Oh, Jane, this is worth it." And she said, that old coot, I almost threw that picture away because I didn't know who it was, and he looks like some kind of varmint because he had a long beard and he looked like a tramp. And she said, I don't know who that fellow is. I said, I know exactly who it is. I don't have to even, I don't have to look. It's Fletch Woodard. And she said, Fletch Woodard, I've heard that name before. And I told her who he was. And I said, but this is the most valuable thing that you could have ever given me. I don't care what else is in there unless there's more Fletch Woodard pictures. But I said, this is, one of a kind. There is not another image of this that exists as far as I know. And thank goodness your mama never threw it away, and you didn't throw it away before you brought it over here to me. So, but we do have a picture of Fletch. I almost brought it today, but if you'll stop by the museum sometimes, I'll show it to you. But he was a strange and peculiar character. He really, really was. Anybody got any questions?
Why was he called the Liberal?
He called himself the Liberal. That was the name he put on himself. So he was very free thinking. He believed in women's rights. Like I said, even though he was a trained medical doctor, he was into, in compounding his own medicines and herbal, remedies for things. And like I said, he was into spiritualism and seances. He just thought himself as a free thinking person that didn't meet the mold that most people expected gentlemen at that particular time from decent families to live like that and to act like that. So he called himself the Liberal.